It's a blitz showdown between two of the world's best, Fabiano Caruana, with the white pieces, taking on Anish Giri. Let's dive in, and we open with a very symmetrical King's Indian setup. Both players fianchetto their bishops and castle kingside, a mirror image on the board as they feel each other out. White is the first to break symmetry with pawn to b3, but this is a slight inaccuracy that gives black an early chance. A more standard approach was better. The main line runs pawn to d4, black responds with d5, white challenges with c4. The pawn is captured on c4, and the queen comes to a4, keeping the pressure. But in the game, Caruana plays pawn to b3, and for a moment Giri has a small edge. But black immediately returns the favor. Pawn to d6 misses the opportunity. The engine wanted to see pawn to c5, directly challenging white's setup and seizing the initiative, and so the position settles down. White develops the bishop to b2, and after a few more pawn moves from both sides, the center becomes locked. We're in for a strategic, closed battle. The middle game maneuvering begins. Both players are repositioning their knights, looking for the ideal squares. Black's knight heads for the king side, eyeing an attack, and the plans are becoming clear. White establishes a powerful knight on the d5 outpost, a real thorn in black's side, while Giri starts his counterplay on the queen side, pushing his b-pawn. The queen side opens up as pawns are traded on b5. Lines are cleared for the pieces, and white's knight reroutes to the excellent c4 square, controlling key territory. Black's knight leaps into d4. It looks active, but it's an error that allows white to simplify into a much better position. A more patient approach was needed. The better try was knight to f6. After rook to b1, knight takes the strong knight on d5, the pawn recaptures, and only then does the knight jump to d4 under better circumstances. Instead, in the game, knight to d4 allows white a very favorable trade, and Fabi snaps it off immediately. The bishop takes the knight on d4. A faulty recapture. Taking with the c-pawn on d4 is a serious mistake. It was critical to play pawn takes pawn on b3 first, which would have won the rook on a1, and white instantly punishes the error. The knight jumps to b6, a fantastic square that puts immense pressure on black's position. Black's defense with rook to b8 is another slip, and it's going to cost a pawn. There was a much tougher way to hold on. The best defense was rook to a7. White would take the pawn on a4, bishop to a6 attacks the rook moves to b1, and bishop to h6 keeps the game alive. But after the move played, rook to b8, white now has a clear path to win material. White cashes in, taking the pawn on a4 and immediately pushing his own to a5. This passed pawn is now a monster, and black is scrambling to contain it. A small imprecision from white with queen to b3. The engine preferred rook to b1, which would have maintained even more pressure on black's tangled pieces. Giri uses the moment to untangle, bringing his knight back to f6 to help with the defense. But that's another slip from Caruana. Knight to d5 is played, but he completely misses a tactic with rook to b1 that would have won a piece on the spot. A huge moment. Giri has a chance to punish white's error, but instead he plays bishop to a6, a significant inaccuracy that hands the advantage right back. The correct move was knight takes knight on d5. After the queen recaptures, bishop to a6 follows, white plays rook to c1, and black's rook to b8 would have relieved all the pressure. But in the game, bishop to a6 is played, and the position is once again winning for white. Another inaccuracy. Knight takes knight on f6 with check is not the best. This trade actually helps black's defense. The stronger move was knight to b4, keeping the winning grip. The trade happens, and now white's focus shifts. Caruana doubles his rooks on the c-file, building up overwhelming pressure and preparing to break through. Black defends with rook to c7, but it's another slight inaccuracy that just allows white to cement his control over the critical c-file. And white misses another chance. And bishop to f1 is too slow. The most forceful continuation was simply trading rooks on c7, leading to a winning endgame. So black initiates the trade himself, with rook takes the rook on c6. And rook takes rook on c6 is a fantastic move. In fact, it's the only move that keeps a winning advantage for white. And here's the point. If black's rook goes to e6, white pushes the h-pawn, the rook has to move again to e7, and now queen to b4 simply traps and wins the rook. Black defends with rook to e7, and white's knight returns to the dominant d5 square, once again controlling the board. But what a find from Giri. Rook to b7 is a brilliant defensive move, the one and only way to hold this incredibly difficult position together. A flurry of action follows. White's queen swings to a3, forcing black's bishop to b5. White then captures the pawn on d6, but black snags the passed a-pawn in return. It's a trade of blows. White pushes the pawn to h4, but this is too slow. He missed knight to f6 check, a much stronger move that would have led to a decisive material advantage, and now a critical mistake from black. After being let off the hook, he plays bishop to e1, which completely throws away his drawing chances. The correct defense was bishop to d8. White would push the h-pawn, pawns would be traded, the bishop moves to e2, and white is only slightly better. But he misses that. Instead, bishop to e1 is played, and white is completely winning once again. But the roller coaster continues. Rook to f6 is another imprecision from white. The clinical move was queen to c5, which would have ended the game much more quickly, and another error from black with bishop to e8. The defense with bishop to d2 offered much better resistance, but now white's advantage grows again. White advances the dangerous h-pawn, while black's rook infiltrates to b1, creating some counter threats against the white king. King to g2 is an unnecessary complication from Caruana. A queen move like q7 was more precise and would have kept the path to victory clear. But black lets him off the hook. Rook to b2 is a mistake, failing to capitalize on white's imprecision and allowing him to consolidate for the final attack. White repositions his rook to f3, lining up his pieces for the decisive blow. And here it comes. Black plays a rook to c2, and this is the game-losing blunder. It walks right into a forced mate. Rook to b6 knight takes rook on b6 queen, takes knight on b6 queen to e7 queen to b8. But that's not what happened. Giri plays rook to c2, and the position is now mate in 5. Unbelievable. In this chaotic blitz game, Caruana has a forced mate on the board, and he misses it. The winning move was knight to f6 check, king to g7, pawn to h6 is check. The king takes the pawn, and queen to f8 check leads to a swift mate. But instead, he plays queen to e7, a shocking blunder that throws the win away. The drama is not over. Giri now has one last chance to save the game. He has to find the only move to survive. The saving move was rook to c6. White would check with the knight on f6, the rook takes the knight, the queen recaptures, and with bishop to b4, black is holding on. But he misses it. He plays bishop to a4, and this is the final fatal blunder. Now it's mate again. And Caruana finds it this time. Queen takes the pawn on f7, check. There's no defense, and that is all she wrote. What a chaotic endgame. After a roller coaster of blunders and missed opportunities, Fabiano Caruana wins. Anish Giri resigned here because he saw the forced mate in 2. The king must move to h8. Queen to f6 delivers check. The king is forced back to g8, and knight to e7 is a beautiful checkmate.